Nirpa Tushnim Bhagavana Samadasi Sabyaschatad Anuvrata Sri Shukovacha Bhagavana Pitach Trutva Bhagavan Api Touch Trutva Ahasya Gadadir Nirpa Tushnim Bhaguva Sadasi Tushnim Bhaguva Sadasi Shabyaschatad Anuvrata Sri Shukuvacha Bhagavanapi Tashtrutva Prahasya Gadadir Nipa Tushnim Bhaguva Sadasi Sabhyachatad Anuvrata Sri Shuka Uvacha. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, Bhagavan, Lord Shiva, Api, also, taught that Shrutva, hearing, Prahasya, smiling, Agadadi, whose intelligence is unfathomed, Nirpa, O king, Tushmim, silent, Vabhuva, remained, Sadasi, in the assembly, Sabya, everyone assembled there, Ta, and Tat Anuvrata, followed Lord Shiva, remained silent. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srila Shukadev Goswami continued, My dear king, after hearing Chitraketu's statement, Lord Shiva, the most powerful personality, whose knowledge is fathomless, simply smiled and remained silent. And all the members of the assembly followed the Lord by not saying anything. Purport. Chitraketu's purpose in criticizing Lord Shiva is somewhat mysterious and cannot be understood by a common man. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, however, has made the following observations. Lord Shiva, being the most exalted Vaishnava and one of the most powerful demigods, is able to do anything he desires. Although he was externally exhibiting the behavior of a common man and not following etiquette, such actions cannot diminish his exalted position. The difficulty is that a common man, seeing Lord Shiva's behavior, might follow his example. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Yadyadacharati Shirshtas Tatadeve Taroj Janam Sayad Pramanam Kurute Lokastad Anuvardate. Whatever actions a great man performs, common men follow. Whatever standard he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. A common man might also criticize Lord Shiva, like Daksha, who suffered the consequences for his criticism. King Chitraketu desired that Lord Shiva cease this external behavior so that others might be saved from criticizing him and thus becoming offenders. If one thinks that Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the only perfect personality, whereas the demigods, even such demigods as Lord Shiva, are inclined to improper social affairs, he is an offender. Considering all this, King Chitraketu was somewhat harsh in his behavior with Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva, who is always deep in knowledge, could understand Chitraketu's purpose, and therefore he was not at all angry. Rather, he simply smiled and remained silent. The members of the assembly surrounding Lord Shiva could also understand Chitraketu's purpose. Consequently, following the behavior of Lord Shiva, they did not protest. Instead, following their master, they remained silent. If the members of the assembly thought that Chitraketu had blasphemed Lord Shiva, they would certainly have left at once, blocking their ears with their hands. Om Aginitaramandasya Ginanjana Shlakaya Chakshumatamyana Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we are continuing with this pastime of Chitraketu criticizing Lord Shiva and consequently becoming cursed by Mother Parvati. And Prabhupada raises several points in this purport. First being, of course, about the exalted position of Lord Shiva. And actually, he mentions not just Lord Shiva, but actually all the demigods. Sometimes one might come to the conclusion by reading both Shastra itself and the Bhaktivedanta purports. One might develop a unfavorable attitude towards the demigods. Of course, we read again and again to not engage in demigod worship, and it's one of the offenses of the holy name to consider names of demigods, even those like Lord Brahma or Lord Shiva, to be equal to or independent of the names of Lord Vishnu. And yeah, Prabhupada also has very strong words for those who are into demigod worship. It says in Bhagavad Gita that their intelligence is stolen, or in other words, they have become unintelligent, and various other things like that. So it might be a danger that we may face of denigrating the demigods. We should understand actually the position of the various demigods, who are all devotees. Not only that, they are very pious as well. One has to perform a very many pious activities in order to attain the body of a demigod. And all the demigods are, at least at some level, devotees of Lord Krishna, of Lord Vishnu. Uh, Generally, of course, we read that they are mixed devotees, but still they're considered very exalted personalities. And the chief among, or the greatest among all the demigods, uh, is Mahadev, which is, of course, another name for Lord Shiva. And this situation that Chitraketu came upon with Lord Shiva sitting in front of various sages, um, many of whom were likely renunciants or yogis or things like that, rishis, with his wife on his lap, which is, of course, not a very cultured situation to be in. But one should understand the position of Lord Shiva. and to not consider him a ordinary personality. His normal personality comes and sits his wife on his lap simply because he wants to enjoy. It's generally out of lust that it is done. But Lord Shiva, his wife, is the personified material energy, but he has no enjoying propensity. Lord Shiva, being a pure devotee, being a exalted Vaishnava, does not himself have any enjoying propensity, but simply has the desire to perform service to Krishna. So we should not consider that Lord Shiva, who is described as dhira, steady, because his mind is never overcome by lust. We should not consider that he is trying to enjoy with his wife like a normal person does. If we consider any of these great personalities to be normal people or on the same platform as the conditioned souls, then it is a great offense. It is not the proper understanding. And this happens increasingly. It happens uh, across the world a lot, and increasingly even in India, where these great personalities are, because of the activities described in the Bhagavatam and other Shastras, uh, and because of misunderstandings, people criticize them, not understanding their exalted position. I know actually when I was first reading Bhagavatam, I asked my mentor, Mangalarti, a question about Indra, uh, because it seemed that, Indra, you read Indra always, disturbing sacrifices, having to do politics and things that led to this whole literature situation, uh, trying to disturb Vrindavan and things like that. And my question was basically, um, why doesn't Indra learn his lesson the first time? Why does he keep making these mistakes? Uh, and of course, the answer was that Indra is a post that's inhabited by different people at different times. So it's not necessarily always the same Indra that's doing all of these different activities. And also, if you have a lifetime that's, a few million years, messing up, a handful of times uh, isn't so much comparatively to one's lifespan. But yeah, so this mentality can come of considering these devotees, or even the Supreme Personality of Godhead, like ordinary people. In many places, for example, those who are, um, I've seen examples of people doing or attempting to do Christian apologetics, uh, criticizing the stories, these different personalities. Their focus is on trying to convert Hindus, so to speak. Then, they point out, oh, Lord Shiva did this, Lord Krishna did this, etc. So you should believe in the God of the Bible instead of these other gods. Uh, but on even from other angles as well. I've met multiple people from India who were born and raised in India who criticize Lord Ram in his behavior of sending Sita to the forest. Actually, one of the students that was a few years below me in uh, graduate school at Temple University was this girl from Gujarat, so born and raised Indian. And she saw one day when I came into the office, that I had neck beads on. So she could recognize uh, that, oh, this is ISKCON person. And pretty much the first thing that she said to me was that she did not like Lord Rama or Lord Krishna because Rama sent Sita to the forest and Krishna stole the clothes of the gopis. And basically, she was considering the Supreme Lord to be like an ordinary person. If an ordinary person committed these activities, just a regular jiva, did these actions, then it would be very condemned. But if the Supreme Personality of Godhead performs these actions, then there is pastimes. And actually, the personalities involved um, attain transcendental bliss by engaging in Leela with the Lord in his various forms. So we should have a very clear understanding of uh, the position of uh, Lord Shiva and Lord Krishna and all of the demigods, all personalities that we are dealing with and hearing about or reading about as we read Bhagavatam and other scriptures. And Chitraketu, as it is pointed out, did understand the position of Lord Shiva. It wasn't that Chitraketu thought that Shiva was just some sense enjoyer who was so enamored with his wife that even in the company of uh, exalted sages, he just had to embrace her. But he understood this principle from the Bhagavad Gita, uh, that's quoted in the Bhagavad Gita, that whatever actions a great man performs, common men will follow. People will say, oh, well, Shiva can uh, sit with his wife in this way, in front of these, uh, great sages, great renunciates, great yogis. So if I want to do the same, then I can, sit embracing my wife or partner, in the assembly of devotees in front of renunciants, brahmacharis, and it doesn't really matter because look, Lord Shiva did the same thing. Or, if I want to go enjoy with women in the middle of the night, oh, well, Krishna did the same thing, so therefore I should be allowed to perform these pastimes, just as Krishna performed his pastimes. This is, of course, a condemned mentality. But the general principle that whatever acts a great man performs, common men will follow, is true. That people look to the leaders of society in order to figure out how to act. So, great men, the leaders of society, uh, in whatever sphere, should have exemplary character. Not that they can do whatever they want and by some small qualification, they're able to take up this possession. In the modern idea, in the modern conception of these things, one is able to perform some small feat or accomplishment and be considered a great person. Oh, you've manipulated enough people in order to get more votes than somebody else, and therefore you can be a politician, be a leader, be a controller in society. And if your actions are not so good, then who cares? Also, of course, on the academic side, um, which I've been thinking a lot about lately, the scientists, scholars, philosophers claim that, oh, we are the thought leaders of society. We are the people who know what the absolute nature of reality is actually about. But, in their personal activities, they can't even control their own senses. But their conception is, well, I'm qualified in this one way. I got the PhD, I got the faculty position. So who cares, if I drink all the time and sleep with my students and all of these things? That doesn't matter to what type of science I do, what the standard of my scientific prowess is. But of course, we understand from the Bhagavatam uh, that in this case specifically, and in other cases as well, uh, in order to gain knowledge, especially in order to gain knowledge of the absolute nature of reality, one must have controlled senses. You can't trust somebody who is too self-interested. And this applies across the board, whether it is in more Brahminical activities or activities that should be Brahminical, like scholarship, study, things like that, whether it is in governance or whether it is even in business. If the people performing these activities are not actually qualified, not just by the low standards of qualification that we have today, but actually they're not qualified by personal characteristics, then their activities are simply a disturbance. The various business leaders will destroy society and nature, various other things, just for profit. The administrators will oppress the people, um, and the scholars, or the so-called scholars, will simply lead people into illusion. So this principle should be understood that whatever actions great men perform, common men will follow. And so anybody who wishes to have either wishes to have or is put into any sort of leadership position should understand that by the actions that he performs, he is setting the example for others. And this is why Chitraketu is criticizing Lord Shiva. Not necessarily because Lord Shiva is doing anything wrong on his own accord, but that if Lord Shiva does this, he will be implicated in misleading other people into performing the same activity. Therefore, uh, he should, according to this mentality or this argument, abstain from these activities in order to set an example for other people. And that is generally the case. Those of us who are not on the platform of Lord Shiva uh, could, even if we are beyond the need for various rules and regulations and things like that, set an example for others in order that they might be benefited as well. Just, for example, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada, these are pure devotees, Nityasiddha personalities who are uh, beyond the material world and the Varnashram system. So there's actually no need for them to take sannyas, for example. Sannyas is part of the Varnashram system, therefore is accepted for purification. But to set an example for others, they acted within this Varnashram system so that others who are not on their platform can follow them and thus become benefited. And we should consider how this principle applies to us as well. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness, our movement, is also meant for being a leader in society. Our purpose is to spread spiritual knowledge, spiritual philosophy, and spiritual culture through society at large, throughout the entire world. And so we should consider our own activities in the light of uh, this principle of whatever action as great people perform, common men will follow. That we should try to, in our own personal behavior, act in a very cultured and uh, proper way, following the various rules and regulations given for actually civilized people. And we should also be careful to not uh, follow the opposite of this rule, that whatever common men follow, great men, or whatever common men form, great men follow. There's sometimes this idea that comes in that we have to assimilate with the wider culture. That, oh, we have to take on all of these things from the general culture so that people will think, oh, these Hare Krishnas are normal people, and then will uh, listen to our message. Of course, we can sometimes present things in a different way uh, in order to not overwhelm somebody at first. But we should be very careful about this idea of assimilating or adopting the norms or the ways of the wider culture. Uh, because we should understand that if you're normal, so to speak, according to the definition of modern culture, that simply means demon. Uh, Normal in modern culture means demoniac way of life. So we should actually set the example of following as much as possible Vedic culture. And as we try to take up the mantle that Srila Prabhupada set for us as being spiritual leaders in society, as a movement, then people will also take up Vedic culture and thus be benefited, since the entire Vedic culture is meant for spiritual realization. And in that way, we can actually change the culture instead of having the culture change us. We see so many different issues that are formed or that are manifest in the culture at large. Political issues, social issues, or even environmental or health issues in the general populace. And we have a alternative, which is the original spiritual culture uh, given by Lord Krishna and explained by Srila Prabhupada in his books. So we should try to implement this as much as possible. And then if we show that there's an alternative to this modern culture, which is 99% suffering, uh, even the level of material enjoyment is not very elevated in modern culture. Uh, then if we show that there's an alternative, people will come. And then automatically, by engaging in this culture, it will make spiritual advancement. So we should consider how we are acting as well in all realms of life in order to set an example for other people to follow. And if, and actually, there's this principle uh, that if the members of the Krishna consciousness movement act in an exemplary way, then people will become attracted. Prabhupada wanted all of his followers to act as ladies and gentlemen, to act in a very cultured way, so that when people see uh, the devotees, it's like, oh, these are very good sort of people, people that other people like to be around. And so people will become attracted to the movement simply because of that. But alternatively, if people act in a uh, uncultured way or in a sinful way, then people will become repelled from the movement. Of course, ISKCON's history has been uh, I've included many examples of, um, one could say, high-profile fall downs of people not acting in a way befitting uh, their position. And it actually does, for people who know about these things, it has the potential to um, make people unfavorable to the movement. And sometimes these things actually do happen where people become unfavorable because of the various activities or the various scandals that occur. So, because Lord Shiva is able to uh, disregard some of the rules and regulations of Vedic culture, we should not think that we are on the same level. For us, even if we feel that we are beyond the need for such things, we should still follow, um, so that those who are watching us and looking at our behavior will not become misled into committing uh, sinful activities on the plea of following others. We should understand the proper actions, the proper standard of behavior, and try to follow it as much as possible. So I will end here. We have about 15 minutes left. If there are any comments or questions. Shasuri Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Kauswarup. Thank you for the class, the examples, relating it to our everyday lives. Appreciate it. Um, my question, I'm going to tread very lightly into U.S. politics for a second.
Okay.
But very inspired by the reminder of Bhagavad Gita 3:21 about whatever action is performed by a great man, common men follow in his footsteps. So in this realm of this material world that we live in, one could definitely argue, this is not my question, but one could definitely argue that none of the US presidents have this exemplary behavior that we're talking
Mhm.
about, but yet they arrive to this. Oh, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. But they arrive to this significant leadership position. Um, so my question is not necessarily, are there qualifications, put them there, but in this sort of democracy that we live in, a lot of times voters criticize other voters and say that, oh, it's because people didn't show up, or half of the country is blind and ignorant for voting in a
Mhm.
two-party system. But it sounds like from what you're saying, these there's some sort of karmic timing for the actual individual that arrives in a leadership position. Like, am I understanding correctly that it's not all on the voters necessarily? Like, even these quote unquote leaders, right? I'll put quotes around it because I don't think it's the same leadership that we're talking about here.
Right.
But when they arrive to these leadership positions, is a bit of it their own karmic path and not necessarily all on the voters?
I would say probably most of it is their own karmic path. Nobody can get a uh, big position or any sort of position in the material world without uh, having the karma necessary to do so. It's not like, the demigods are arranging for people to have the results of their actions. But then, like, oh, this person was supposed to become president according to his karma, but the voters wanted something else, so we'll just have to change it. No, it's arranged in a certain way so that people with the desires to, for example, get behind a certain movement or have a certain BOV or things like this, uh, are placed in such a way that they will have the opportunity to vote for such a person whose karma is to get into the White House. So it's all arranged in that way. It's not random. Just like, if somebody, um, let's say I have the karma that I'm to be mugged. I, uh, so it's just a kind of more simple example than, large scale national politics. Let's say there's the example that I have the karma that somebody is going to mug me and steal my wallet. It's arranged so that, I was walking down the street one day, I will run into somebody who has the desire to perform that type of activity. But it's still on that person if they choose to perform that activity or not. So it's not like, oh, Paul Sarup had the karma to be mugged, so the mugger is faultless in this scenario. No, he still took the action to perform that activity, and therefore he gets the reaction for that. In one of his future lifetimes, he will be mugged, and it'll be arranged so that he will meet somebody who has that who has that desire, who might or might not act on it. So, yeah, it's arranged so that people with a desire to follow these leaders will be in a position to vote for them. But whether or not they decide to do so is still up to them. So it's not that the voters or those putting people in these positions are just entirely blameless, uh, but the personality who gets this position also has the karma to get that position. So hopefully that clears things up.
Yes, thank you, thank you. It sounds like a two-way street.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Tarka Prabhu,
Yeah, I want to thank you for a great class. You covered a lot of important points.
thank you.
Um, Yad yad acharati shrestastad eve taro janaha. Sayat pramanam kurute lukastadar vartate. That whatever action a great man performs, common men follow. And whatever standards he sets by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. Lots of people try to justify um, immoral behavior by citing the example of either Lord Shiva or Lord Krishna. Um,
Mhm.
and Srila Prabhupada, of course, refuted this nonsense many times in various ways. Some people will cite the fact that Lord Shiva, for example, he is known to sometimes consume ganja.
Mhm.
Um, and so Srila Prabhupada would refute this by saying, well, Lord Shiva also drank an ocean of poison.
Right.
So if you can drink an ocean of poison, then perhaps you can also consume ganja. Um, Lord Krishna, some people will say his behavior is sometimes immoral. But who is the arbiter of morality? Who establishes
Mhm.
what is moral? Ultimately, it is Krishna himself. But we for us, mere humans, we have Manu Samhita as the law book for mankind. Manu Samhita is uh, also known as Manu Smriti. And this was authored by the first of the 14 Manus, Swayambhuva Manu, who was directly the son of Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma, who does Lord Brahma worship? He says, Govinda Mari Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. So, you know, if you think that your morality is greater than that of Swayambhuva Manu or Lord Brahma, and you know better what to do, they accept the supremacy of Krishna. And they don't seem to have a problem with the fact that Krishna has apparent dalliances with young girls in the dead of night. They understand him to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So foolish people fail to understand this. And speaking of foolish people, you mentioned the fact that Srila Prabhupada sometimes speaks rather harshly of individuals who worship the demigods. And Srila Prabhupada would sometimes be criticized by people for his criticism of those who worship the demigods. And of course, in India, demigod worship is quite popular. So when Srila Prabhupada would preach in India, lots of people would object, and Srila Prabhupada would say, typically his response is, I don't say this. Krishna says this. The Supreme Personality of Godhead himself is saying this. What did Krishna say? He said, what is that, in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, text 20. Tamaistai Hritigana Prapadyante Yadevata Tam Tam Niyamam Ashtaya Prakritya Niyata Svaya. Hritigana means deprived of knowledge. So we're referring to individuals with a poor fund of knowledge. He says, those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto the demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own nature. He says again in the same chapter, the 23rd text, he says, Antavatu palamtesham dad vavat yalpamadasam. Alpamadasam is in the synonym, Srila Prabhupada says those of small intelligence, but there's Sumetasam, which is good intelligence, and there's Alpametasam, which is bad or poor intelligence, or a deficit, a lack of intelligence. So Tad Lavat Yalpametasam Devan Deva Yajo Yanti Mad Bhakta Yanti Mam Api. Krishna says, men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach my supreme planet. So Krishna is speaking harshly of those who worship the demigods, and he uses some choice terminology like alpametasam, basically, saying that you're poor intelligence. So anyway, there's that. What else did I have to contribute? While we're speaking of Swayambhuva Manu, son of Brahma, he also is the father of Uttanapad and Priyavrata. So they are notable ancestors of Dhruva Maharaj, and we will be hearing more about them. Anyway, Thank you again for your class, which was excellent. Yeah, no one should make the mistake of trying to follow the example of Lord Shiva, but many do. And so it's a good point. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Haribol. Dusty Prem, bring us home.
Hare Krishna. Okay.
Uh-oh.
So on this point, yeah, of like setting good example. I'm wondering, in terms of Gita Nagari, of course, we know that it's supposed, you know, ISKCON is supposed to share Varnashram Dharma, and yeah, Prabhupada was like going to come here to show how that was done. And so I'm wondering, because I guess I'm feeling conflicted, because there's often sorry. Sorry, one. Okay, so yeah, I'm conflicted, because there's sometimes this it's a proper notion that we're about pure devotional service and going beyond our the varnas and ashramas. But at the same time, it seems like we should be setting that example of the varna ashram dharma program. So I'm wondering, like, how, should we be moving toward that here, like implementing those amongst ourselves as a way of showing the world, or is that just, or I mean, and I guess we should, obviously, but like, is it just unreasonable at this point?
Yeah. So we should as much as is practical, but we shouldn't. So, if somebody is, for example, like a farmer, right? That's kind of their propensity. Um, let's say it's somebody who's been second initiated, but their propensity is more like Vaishya, like business, farming, etc. Then they can have that as their preferred engagement, but it shouldn't be like, oh, we need somebody to do the 3:30 offering. And it's like, oh, no, 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 I can't. I'm a Vaishya. I'm not a Brahmana uh, devotee. Like, that's not my Varna. So, you have to do the needful no matter what your Varna is. Uh, and of course, a devotee can act according to any Varna. So it can get a bit complicated. But the simple answer is that even within the Van Ashram system, we're aiming towards pure devotional service. If you can't perform pure devotional service, then act according to your propensity and give the results to Krishna. And then if you can't uh, do that, then do pious activity and etc. So there's a whole list in the Bhagavad Gita of kind of a hierarchy. But the main thing is pure devotional service. But if you're not on that level, then act according to Varnashram and give the results. And then so on. So hopefully I think it's more than I could talk about right now, all the details. And I don't necessarily know all the details as far as how to implement. But hopefully that's some indication. Then we can talk more over breakfast if you want, because the conch has just sounded.
Could we take the conversation to Tulsi's room?
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
Guys, you should write it down.
Kijai.
I have a few things to say about this.
Yeah, so uh, yeah, I guess my point to Dusty Prim's question is that yes, we are trying to implement Van Ashram for the people in general, but our aim is always towards pure devotional service. And with the level of development towards Varnashram that we are at now, it's not always possible to fully engage people strictly according to their Varna. But that, sometimes you have to just do what you need. So, Tarka Prabhu, you have some comments?
Yeah, I guess first of all, if we want to try to understand what it is that we should be doing at Gita Nagari, we should give first consideration, top consideration, to the specific instructions that Srila Prabhupada gave us when he came to Gita Nagari. He told us precisely what to do here. He gave us a mandate. He said, this is what you should do. And you will not find that he didn't really talk a lot about Varna and Ashram. He talked about agricultural productivity. He talked about simple living. So, we have the transcript of Srila Prabhupada's talk at Gita Nagari. That was 1976 on, I think it was July 15th. And devotees should read that. If there's any question as to what we should be doing, Srila Prabhupada made it very clear. He came here and he told us exactly what to do. Now, the idea that Srila Prabhupada wanted to return to Gita Nagari, that absolutely is true. And he endeavored to do that. However, I will tell you that there, amongst my godbrothers, and some of the senior-most devotees, there is considerable skepticism about the idea propagated by Abhiram Prabhu that Srila Prabhupada's plan was to implement Varnashram, and that he was regarding that as the second half of his mission. We don't actually find any evidence of him saying such things anywhere else at any point in time. He didn't give much consideration to Varna and Ashram. He said things both pro and con for Varnashram, but he clearly throughout the years that he was preaching, he didn't give it much importance. What he had in mind for Gita Nagari, he told us specifically, and he gave many other instructions for other farm communities that were quite similar. This idea about the reestablishment of Varnashram, it's something that other acharyas also took an interest in, but it was never a primary consideration. Krishna consciousness can be propagated very nicely in the absence of Varnashram. Srila Prabhupada pointed this out when devotees had questions about Varnashram. He said, well, how did I establish this movement? How did I establish this gun? There was no Varnashram. If Varnashram was essential or critical to the establishment of Krishna consciousness, then how was I able to establish Krishna consciousness? Krishna consciousness spread in spite of the absence of Varna and Ashram. So So his point was that it's clearly not that important, but it is valuable for those who are not Krishna conscious and are either disinclined to take up Krishna consciousness or don't have the capacity to immediately understand it. If somehow or other they can be engaged in activity on the basis of Varna and Ashram, they get gradual progress. But it should be understood that that progress is really gradual. It's an extremely slow process that may take many lifetimes to bring someone to the point of chanting Hare Krishna. It's we're trying to preach efficiently, and there are more efficient ways to propagate Krishna consciousness than Varnashram. But Varnashram is good. It is a good and practical way to organize society, and the world would benefit from Varnashram. But Srila Prabhupada said in connection with Varnashram, he said, we are not going to be social reformers. That's not our mission. We want to establish Krishna consciousness. Varnashram is a mundane system. It's material. It's not really our thing. Vaishnavas have nothing to do with Varnashram, but it's good for society. So where it's possible to establish Varnashram, we have no objection and will do it. But it's not a major consideration, and this is a problem for many devotees to understand, because this idea that was propagated by Abhiram Prabhu was further propagated by back in the day. This was decades ago, before we had social media platforms. There was a conferencing system set up by devotees, which was known as COM. Later, it evolved into something called POMHO. But so a conference was set up on this conferencing system for devotees who were interested in cow protection. And in that conference, lots of things happened. I was a member of the conference. We discussed all kinds of topics related to the development of farm projects and cow protection. And it was largely due to the discussions on within that conference that an association was established between farm projects and Varnashram. And it arose largely because Varnashram talks about Vaishyas and the activity of Vaishyas. And so this was at a time in ISKCON when the business of Vaishyas was neglected and not taken very seriously by the leadership. And the devotees who had the inclination towards activities appropriate for a Vaishya felt as though they were neglected, not encouraged, not provided for. Our farm projects were languishing. They were not being developed. They were going nowhere. Some of them failed, and the land was sold. The GBC was not putting any energy into the development of farm projects, and mostly they couldn't relate to farm projects at all. It was only later when Shiva Ram Swami famously took an interest in the development of farm projects, and there were some others whose names are slipping my mind right now. Here at Gita Nagari, we had done a lot in the early days, thanks largely to Paramananda Prabhu, who was the temple president, and Satsvarup Das Goswami, who was the GBC at the time. But also living here at Gita Nagari in those days was Hari Krishna Dasi, who became the first and only disciple of Paramananda Prabhu. And she latched on to this association between Varnashram and farm projects. And she became I guess, a big proponent of cow protection and farm projects. And she took it upon herself to write what was initially conceived of as a series of books on Varnashram, but it wound up actually only comprising one volume. So it's entitled Volume 1, but there are no other volumes. So she didn't write it. It's a compilation of excerpts from Srila Prabhupada's books and lectures and conversations. So it talks a lot about Varnashram, talks a lot about farm projects and cow protection, and it is not comprehensive. It is specifically edited to support Hari Krishna Dasi's agenda, which was not necessarily a clear representation of what Srila Prabhupada was trying to convey. Members of the Cow Conference on COM had a particular bias, and they had created this association between cow protection and farm projects and Varnashram. And Srila Prabhupada himself did sometimes associate the idea of Varnashram with his farm projects, because it would be impossible to try to establish even a model of Varnashram in society at large. But within the microcosm of a farm project, which is, Srila Prabhupada conceived of such projects as a village, a small section of society, somewhat separate, removed from society at large. Within that context, you could establish a model of Varnashram and use that to demonstrate to society at large what is possible and how that would practically work, what it would look like. So that was the connection that Srila Prabhupada made. In Hyderabad, the Hyderabad farm, there were two projects in Hyderabad. There was a city temple and a farm project. I was with Srila Prabhupada in Hyderabad. I had been the acting temple president for the city temple, and when Srila Prabhupada visited the farm in '76, I was there with him and heard what he had to say about the development of farm projects and Varnashram. His conception of the implementation of Varnashram within a farm project was extremely simple. He didn't express an interest in trying to demonstrate a full manifestation of Varnashram, but only select portions that would fit in nicely with our overall purpose in a farm project. And Srila Prabhupada's interest in farm projects was it was not for the purpose of reestablishing Varnashram. That notion should be tossed out immediately. He had other purposes for farm projects, but the setting was one which lent itself well to implementing some aspects of Varnashram. And Hari Sari will confirm, if you ask him about this, that at Hyderabad, Srila Prabhupada, when he spoke of Varnashram, he talked about just simply, the people living in the surrounding area were all farmers. They were all Vaishyas, and so he talked about making provisions for them, supplying land for them if necessary, portioning off, some of the farm's land for their use, establishing a small temple, a deity, whatever Vishnu Tattva personality they are attracted to worshiping, establishing that as a central figure and the center of their little village within the greater farm community, and establishing the worship of the deity, distribution of prasad, daily get-togethers to chant Lord's holy names and hear his pastimes, and honor prasad together. And if you can understand how Varnashram fits into what I've just described, then good for you. But that's about, that's as close as Srila Prabhupada came to discussion of Varnashram, that just, engage the Vaishyas in producing food and protecting the cows, and facilitate them and encourage them to advance gradually in Krishna consciousness. That was the extent of it. It was pretty simple. It didn't get into discussion about other varnas. He didn't talk about the ashrams. He just, focused on engaging the Vaishyas particularly. So anyway, there is now a widespread understanding that the reestablishment of Varnashram is something that Srila Prabhupada really wanted. And the only evidence we have for that is that Abhiram Prabhu says that Srila Prabhupada said it. There is no recording of him saying that. There's just Abhiram Prabhu's word that, Srila Prabhupada said this to him personally. You can understand that however you like. Typically, anything that Srila Prabhupada was quite serious about, he would mention it to more than one person. He would dictate a letter or write a letter. There would be transcripts of him speaking about such things. He would talk a lot about it if it was something that was seriously on his mind. This is something that evidently he mentioned one time to one person only and never again. So it brings the concept into question for many senior devotees. It's just incongruous with everything else that Srila Prabhupada was saying and doing all throughout his time with us. So that's one consideration. The other major thing I wanted to convey is, as I already said, that what Srila Prabhupada had in mind for Gita Nagari, particularly, he expressed in his talk at Gita Nagari. I see there is a link for that in the chat for those who are interested. So I encourage you to read that. And what you will find is that the the major thrust of what he was talking about was creating a model of simple living, not necessarily a model of varnashram, but a model of simple living, depending upon the land and the cows, depending upon Krishna by depending upon the land and the cows, living simply as Krishna lived. If you can get a picture in your head of how Krishna was living, if you read Krishna book, you can understand a lot about how Krishna was living in Vrindavan, simple village setting, no industrialization, no big technology, not even internal combustion engines, pretty simple living, transport by ox cart, and cultivation of fields with oxen and plows and harrows. Very simple lifestyle. No power utility, no electricity. Pretty simple. Cows milked by hand. Uh, Butter churned from cream with hand churns, and very simple living, extremely simple. And so Srila Prabhupada speaks specifically about this, living as Krishna lived. Set that example, because it's Krishna's example. Krishna's example is perfect. It is perfect and ideal. It is ecologically sound, and it is sustainable indefinitely. The world can go on like that for millennia without a problem. And it did go on for millennia like that. And to this day, huge percentages of the Earth's population are still living like that. And they can go on living like that on the same tract of land forever without a problem. If you're keeping cows, you have an endless supply of cow manure. You will never have a problem of infertile soil. You can go on indefinitely. It's a perfect system, and perfectly sustainable. It's the perfect lifestyle. It solves a host of ills. So Srila Prabhupada wanted to set that example of a perfect lifestyle, the way that Krishna lived, the example that Krishna himself set. That's what Srila Prabhupada had in mind for his foreign communities. And if you have any other idea of what Srila Prabhupada had in mind for his foreign communities, you might be mistaken. But we do have Srila Prabhupada's mandate for Gita Nagari. So if there's any question as to what we should be doing here, then you have to read the transcript of Srila Prabhupada's talk at Gita Nagari, because that's our mandate. That's what we have to follow. It's all laid out very clearly by Srila Prabhupada. There should be no question. He doesn't talk very much about Varnashram. That wasn't his primary interest. Practically the only mention of Varnashram was he talked about the business of Vaishyas. And he talked about cow protection, which is the business of the Vaishyas. That's about the only reference to Varnashram you will find in that talk. So my advice is read that and have your questions, concerns, and doubts erased. It's very clear. Srila Prabhupada told us exactly what he wanted. Hare Krishna.
Very well. Thank you, Prabhu. I guess one, comment or response that I have to that is that in Srila Prabhupada's books, he does talk about Varnashram a lot. So I'm studying Bhagavad Gita right now, And, even, in the introduction in the first few chapters, he talks about Varnashram Dharma. And I wonder, like, if we're not falling into, what could be called the exact word fallacy. So, like, for example, Prabhupada gives us, says, we should follow Dharma and the Vedic injunctions. And he gives a definition of Varnashram Dharma as that society which follows the Vedic injunctions. And, I'm seeing the whole idea of simple living and high thinking. So, Prabhupada, so the Varnashram system can be said to have two parts, right? The Varna and the Ashram part. Prabhupada did make brahmacharis, grihastas, sannyasis. I don't know if anybody was old enough to take Vanaprastha necessarily when he was physically here. And it seems to me that on the Varna side, that if you are having this kind of self-sustainable uh, situation that Prabhupada did once, as you were describing, simple living, you would have people who are, teachers and probably more scholarly and like, studying the Shastra. You would have people who are administrators. You would have people, dealing with the cows and agriculture. And then you would have people that are just workers. So that kind of naturally, the Varnas are already there when you're talking about self-sustainability and simple living. And I need to reread the uh, conversation or the lecture that you were talking about. But and it seems to me that, when Prabhupada was talking about simple living, uh, it kind of automatically meant Varnashram because these different sections of society are always there, and it's just whether we're going to have Daiva Varnashram or Asura Varnashram. From my understanding, there's some form of Varnashram even now because uh, people are engaged in these various activities just in a very demoniac sort of way, while we should be engaged in these activities with Krishna in the center. And from my understanding, that's what Prabhupada means when he said village life. Uh, so I don't know if I'm in illusion in thinking that, but that's my understanding of what is even meant by, village life in Van Ashram. And that it kind of falls onto the farms because, as you pointed out, it's not going to happen in the city.
Yeah, if you've read Hari Krishna Dasi's book, you are to be forgiven um, for thinking that village life means Varnashram, because that's the conclusion that you will come to. Um, but yes, obviously Srila Prabhupada spoke a lot about Varnashram. Srila Prabhupada absolutely established the ashrams within ISKCON. And as far as the Varnas are already there. The Varnas exist. They are, created by Krishna, and everyone falls into a particular Varna, like it or not. The Varnas are there. And so Srila Prabhupada educated us on these facts, that this is the system created by Krishna. It exists and will continue to exist. Everyone falls into a particular Varna, and it's helpful to know. Um, um, in order to be able to play a particular part, or to fit into society, and even just to sustain yourself, to have some understanding of your Varna is really valuable, or even critical. You should know what kind of a person you are, what activity suits you. But Srila Prabhupada also made it clear that for Vaishnavas, it's just really not particularly important. I mean, he made it really, really clear. You will find lots of discussion of Varnashram, to be sure, and Srila Prabhupada presents it in a particular context, and sometimes based upon his discussion of Varnashram, it appears to be a very important thing. But if you view it in the greater context of everything that Srila Prabhupada had to say about Varnashram, and particularly if you listen to his conversations and his lectures, not just what is written in the books, I find that devotees at large are substantially less familiar with Srila Prabhupada's lectures, but the lectures are extremely important, and he has much to say that that adds context to what is described in the books. You will find oftentimes different angles presented that enable you to better understand what he has stated in the books. Anyway, he is, as I say, he makes statements both pro and con. Everyone understands, I think, pretty much the value, the benefit of Varnashram, but Srila Prabhupada also talks about the fact that it's not particularly important. And particularly for the Vaishnavas, we follow it anyway. We need to understand it. We need to know what it is and how it works, and we are expected to follow it as far as is practical in order to set an example for society at large. We have an obligation to do that, to set an example. But for ourselves, we're not dependent upon Varnashram, nor do we actually fit into Varnashram, because we're Vaishnavas and we have nothing to do with Varnashram. A devotee is transcendental to material designations. Varnashram is all about material designations. We have nothing to do with material designations, but we set an example for those who are not Vaishnavas, for those who are not Krishna conscious, for those who are materially conditioned. For them, Varnashram is valuable. And so for them, we set an example, because what greater men do, lesser men follow. So as Vaishnavas, we're supposed to be the topmost human beings, even superior to the Brahmins, if we're actually fixed up as Vaishnavas. The Brahmanas are the topmost human beings, but the Vaishnavas are even better than the Brahmanas, if they're actually qualified Vaishnavas. And so that means that we have a big obligation. We are supposed to be the ultimate leaders of society. We have to set a good example. So we set the example of Varnashram, and but that's the extent of our interest. We implement Varnashram for the purpose of setting an example, not because we need it or we depend upon it, but only to, for the purpose of benefiting others by setting that example. Otherwise, we just act on the basis of Krishna's instructions, and Krishna's instructions as they are reflected by our acharyas and our spiritual master, and that's all that we need to be concerned with. We can do anything. A Vaishnava can adopt any mode of behavior on the order of his spiritual master, on the order of Krishna. He does whatever. So, within the scope of Varnashram, an individual is bound to act within the framework of varnashram. A brahmana, under certain emergency circumstances, can sometimes take up the work of, another varna. But Vaishnavas are transcendental to the whole bowl of wax. We have nothing to do with any of that. It just doesn't matter to us. Krishna consciousness is not dependent upon any material condition or circumstance. It's completely independent of all those things. So, and Srila Prabhupada pointed that out in one conversation, that, explaining, how have I established this movement in the complete absence of Varna and Ashram? Obviously, Krishna consciousness is not in any way dependent upon Varna Ashram. And if we never establish Varna Ashram, Krishna consciousness will still go on. And we will continue to propagate Krishna consciousness because it's perfect and complete in itself, and it doesn't depend upon anything else. Varnashram is not necessary for us to carry on the Krishna consciousness movement or to propagate it, but it is helpful for those who are not Krishna conscious, and so that's our interest. To set an example, and if it's at all possible, to educate the leaders of secular society and encourage the implementation of the principles of Varna and Ashram within the greater society for the benefit of non-devotees, for the conditioned souls. That would be valuable work, because Varnashram will gradually elevate those individuals to the platform of Krishna consciousness after a long time. Otherwise, we're not concerned. It has value, but it's not nearly as valuable as simply chanting Hare Krishna.
Mhm.
If you encourage someone to just chant Hare Krishna and offer your bhoga to Krishna, what you've done is far more valuable than the establishment of Varnashram, and the individual concerned would be far more greatly benefited. Krishna consciousness is just vastly superior to Varna and Ashram, but it has value. It has value, and it was followed for millennia. It's how the world has been organized since time immemorial, and it's a system that works. It's established by Krishna himself. We don't want to completely disregard it, because it's given by Krishna. But it's very, very, very difficult to try to reestablish Varnashrama. Difficult or impossible. Srila Prabhupada has stated that maybe at some point in time it may be possible. Otherwise it's very difficult or impossible to do. But if possible, we will do that. But he said we're not going to social reformers. That's not our interest. Our interest is to propagate Krishna consciousness. We want people to chant Hare Krishna. It is practical to organize society into a system of varnas and ashrams, and we ourselves do that. It's valuable, and it's an important example for others. But Vaishnavas are not bound to follow the system of Varna and Ashram. We do it, but we don't have to do it. It would not hurt our Krishna consciousness if we did not do it, but um, but we do it because Krishna instructed Varna and Ashram, and we have to set an example. We have an obligation to set an example. So anyway, if you listen to what Srila Prabhupada has said about Varna and Ashram in the context of everything that Srila Prabhupada has said, you get a clearer understanding and a different understanding than what has been prominent in maybe the past couple of decades. there have been a great many devotees who have been pushing a particular understanding of Varnashram, and they have been successful in establishing a particular perspective. But it began with an agenda, a bias, and it, as such, it ignored whatever Srila Prabhupada had to say that did not support the idea of establishing Varnashram. So in Hari Krishna Dasi's book, for example, you won't find excerpts where Srila Prabhupada is minimizing the value of Varnashram and talking about how it is unnecessary. She focuses on those statements that support the importance and the implementation of Varnashram. So, these individuals and their preaching efforts have resulted now decades later in this concern that perhaps we are neglecting an important aspect of the Krishna consciousness movement, that we have failed to establish Varnashrama. Srila Prabhupada did not think it was that important. If possible, and he would say, in as many words, if possible, then we'll do it. We'll give direction to whomever is interested, but otherwise, we're not dependent on these things, and we don't care. For our own purposes, for organizational purposes, it is practical. We'll utilize it for ourselves as far as it is practical, and we'll set the example, but we're not dependent upon it. I hope that's clear. And once again, to understand what Srila Prabhupada wants from Gita Nagari, he told us very directly. So that talk should be geez, anyone who lives at Gita Nagari, and if you are at all committed to the development of Gita Nagari, you should know that lecture forward and backwards. That's an important requisite. How can we manifest Srila Prabhupada's instructions from Gita Nagari if we don't even know what those instructions are, or if we have some imagined idea of what he wanted from Gita Nagari based upon what others have said? There's no need to rely upon secondhand information. We have firsthand from Srila Prabhupada. Not every farm community has that benefit, but we have the benefit of Srila Prabhupada's direct instructions for the residents of Gita Nagari. He came here and said precisely what he wanted. So we should all know that. I'll stop. Thank you, Hari Krishna.
All right, Bull, thank you for your comments, Prabhu. It's given, I'm sure, all of us a lot to think about in regards to these topics. Dusty Prem, do you have anything to follow up? I saw you were sending some messages in the chat.
No, I mean, like you said, it gives us a lot to think about, and yeah, I mean, it's a I think Sarkapuru knows that, yeah, it's because we were doing like a group reading of Hare Krishna and David Dasi's book, and so now hearing this perspective, it does seem quite radical, but I guess it's things to consider, and yeah, I appreciate Tarkapu's contribution. Yeah, it gives a lot to think about.
Maybe I should put together a collection of Srila Prabhupada's statements on Varnashram that demonstrate the other side of the Varnashram perspective, that because you it's not popularized. For decades, devotees have been trying to push Varnashram, and the original motivation was to encourage ISKCON leaders to give greater support to the development of our farm communities, which were largely unsupported and neglected by the leadership. And so throughout the movement, there has been a barrage of um, um, I don't know how to describe it, tremendous emphasis placed upon Srila Prabhupada's pro-Varnashram statements. They're repeated all over the place. There are websites that will propound these ideas. Hari Krishnadas's book was part of that effort, but no one talks about the things that Srila Prabhupada said that minimize the importance of Varnashram. When Srila Prabhupada spoke in that way, there's, nobody has an interest in repeating those things. But if you don't understand what Srila Prabhupada said as far as the cons of Varnashram, then you don't have a clear and balanced understanding of Srila Prabhupada's position on Varnashram. I'll tell you that right now there's an imbalanced, warped and lopsided understanding of Varnashram, and that was created intentionally. But it ignores a large percentage of what Srila Prabhupada had to say about Varnashram. So the perspective is not clear. It's not complete. It's incomplete and it's imbalanced. So those who have the database can do searches, and if it's a lot to read. There's an awful lot that's been said. It's a massive undertaking if you want to try to study Srila Prabhupada's statements on Varnashram. You wind up having to read through many lectures. It's a big job, but you'll find that Srila Prabhupada's attitude towards Varnashram was that he didn't think it was particularly important. If he did, I think that we would have seen that ISKCON would have been developed by him very differently. There would have been much greater emphasis on Varnashram from the start. But Srila Prabhupada established the ashrams and didn't really seem to establish the Varnas. He could have done that, but we don't really see that he was particularly interested in doing that. He spoke about its importance for the benefit of society at large, but it wasn't really the way he set up ISKCON. Devotees were not segregated into different varnas. So and so Prabhu is a Vaishya, and this Prabhu is a Shudra, and this Prabhu is a Kshatriya, and so on. Srila Prabhupada did not create those kinds of designations for devotees. Rather, he constantly hammered into us that we are beyond any material designation. He talked about being without designation. He didn't endeavor to create designations for us. He tried to help us to understand how we are transcendental to any designation. Anyway, I think Dasya had something more to say.
Yeah, Dacia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I guess one statement that maybe reconciles some of it in my head, like both sides of the argument is and I heard this from His Holiness Deva Mitra Swami. He said that in regards to varnashrama, some devotees went to Prabhupada and said, why all this talk about varnashram? Lord Chaitanya said we're beyond it. The devotees are beyond it. And then apparently Srila Prabhupada said, yeah, but if they're devotees, then why are so many of them falling down? So I guess it's like when I hear like, oh, devotees are beyond it, like I know for myself, I'm, I guess, not at that level where I can just do anything, like whatever is just asked of me for my whole life. Like, okay, I can do it. I've done it 10 years now or whatever, but now it's like looking at the rest of my life, it's like, okay, I think I'm not at that level where I can just do any service. And so it gives some comfort that, okay, well, can kind of rely on this varnashram program and as Krishna says, do your duty, perform your duty as an offering to me, and by doing that you can be purified.
That discussion, I've mentioned that particular discussion once before in Bhagavatam class. It is well known to me. Yes, Srila Prabhupada said that to be a Vaishnava is not necessarily such a simple thing. Vaishnava has nothing to do with Varnashram, but are you a Vaishnava? And there's degrees of advancement in Vaishnavism, obviously, and some devotees are fixed up Vaishnavas, and some devotees are just barely hanging on. So he said that Varnashram is practical for those who are not yet firmly established as Vaishnavas. So yeah, that's another important angle that we maintain at least some fundamental structure of Varnashram even within ISKCON for the benefit of those who are not necessarily situated wholly and fully on the transcendental platform. But once again, Srila Prabhupada didn't create designations for us beyond the ashrams, because as one advances as a Vaishnava, he transcends the varnas, and so it would not have made sense. But the most important and fundamental aspect of our Vaishnava philosophy is that you're not this body, we're not this body, and Varnashram is all about the bodily designation. So if we're not this body, then then what do we care for these different designations? Brahmin, Vaishya, Shudra, these Kshatriya, these are all bodily designations, but we are not the body. Krishna consciousness begins from the point of understanding that we're not these bodies, and activity in Krishna consciousness begins, with activity beyond the scope of the material body. So, but if you're still on the bodily platform, then for you there may be some benefit to Varnashram, but understand that the progress that is made by following Varnashram is extremely slow, extremely slow. It's a really, really gradual process, and so we might implement some aspects of it, but we don't rely upon it solely because it's vastly inferior to just simply chanting Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna is very fast. Practically immediately you can get off the bodily platform just by chanting Hare Krishna. You can't achieve that by following Varnashram. You will spend lifetimes following Varnashram and not get off the bodily platform. But you just chant Hare Krishna, and immediately you make immense advancement. So, we don't throw out any process completely, but they have to be understood in proper perspective. Chanting Hare Krishna is vastly superior to following Varnashram. There's practically no comparison. But Varnashram has some value, some benefits. There, should have Prabhupada pointed out that yes, some devotees are falling down. They fall down. They fail to chant Hare Krishna. Well, if you can't chant Hare Krishna, or you can't chant the holy names consistently, steadily, then you may be a candidate for Varnashram. But if you can chant Hare Krishna, you can chant at least 16 rounds every day. You don't need Varnashram. If you can't do that, then Varnashram is helpful for you. Because if you can follow Varna and Ashram, you will gradually progress. But as I say, it's really slow. Srila Prabhupada compared it to a very tall building, and there's the stairway, and there's the elevator. So chanting Hare Krishna is like getting on the elevator. You go straight to the top floor in an instant, or you can take the steps, and it's slow going and it's arduous. It's exhausting, but you'll eventually arrive at the top floor if you stick with it. But it's hard work and it takes a long time. Anyway, study Srila Prabhupada's words. He had a lot to say, and listen to everything he had to say, and you'll get a new perspective. As I say, the emphasis for a couple of decades at least has been on just one side of the Varnashram argument. There's more to understand. So anyway, I'll put together some of Srila Prabhupada's comments on these things for the benefit of those who are interested. And then you'll see what I'm talking about. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. I would be interested in, well, once you put that together, reading it. Because I, you of course have been around the movement longer than I have, but I do listen to very, I guess you could say, pro-Van Ashram speakers. And I don't think anybody is saying that, Van Ashram is a replacement for chanting Hare Krishna or anything like that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, from my understanding, the uh, kind of viewpoint uh, is that, we implement it as much as possible, and if we can implement more, then that's better. But it's not like our chanting Hare Krishna is dependent upon that. And also, there's the reality that kind of as opposed, it's kind of demographically, as opposed to in the 1970s when most of the members of our movements were, brahmacharis living in the temple. Our movement is now, mostly working people, mostly grihastas, and that if they need to have some engagement to sustain themselves, that it's, better to have, you could call it simple living or village life or an ashram. Uh, no, I'm thinking of those things as similar, if not synonymous. And it's better to, if you have to work in that way rather than, go work around karmis in a city in kind of that hellish condition all day. That's kind of like my view from hearing people speak about it. I don't know if that reflects in listening and reading of Prabhupada's words on it.
Just tried to add something to the chat, but
Mm.
it was too large.
Okay.
I'll have to break this up into a couple. And it's just an example of things that Srila Prabhupada had to say. It was a conversation. Let me give the reference here. And I happen to have been present. I was with Srila Prabhupada at the time of this discussion.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think we could continue talking probably until Bhagavatam class tomorrow about all of these different uh, aspects. So, uh, as much as Krishna Katha would be nitya, ongoing, I think we have to cut it off at some point because we all have other services to get to. So, yeah, I think most of us would be interested in hearing those excerpts that you're talking about. But I think we'll end here unless anybody has objections. All right.